Jason held her by her pigtails and started sawing vigorously into her neck. Blood shot up like a glorious Las Vegas fountain as he ground the blade through the notches between her vertebrae until he finally severed her head. When T-Rex was ready for her close-up, Alan switched back to Jason cam in time for a killer shot of her ragged neck stump as Jason peered into the raw cross-section like he was trying to divine the age of a fallen tree by counting the rings. "And that's commercial," Alan said, and the entire team erupted into spontaneous cheers. Friday the 13th, The Jason Strain, Chapter 1. Dinah stood alone on a narrow dirt path that wound its way between mossy ancient trees, the feeble beam of her flashlight barely penetrating the evergreen gloom. Dinah was a hardcore born-again urbanite, and she hated all this business with bugs and dirt and greenery. She had been born out in the boonies, but had been living in the neon jungle for so long that she'd cultivated the city girl's contempt for the so-called great outdoors. She had been assured repeatedly that this creepy midnight hike would be more than worth her while. Standing there shivering in the unseasonable chill, she wasn't so sure. The woods were utterly silent, a tense, expectant hush which rattled Dina's nerves and made her anxious heart seem boombox loud inside of her own head. There was no familiar night orchestra of small creatures looking for love, killing and being killed. The whole area around the lake seemed unnaturally deserted, forsaken by any living thing, except, of course, for the ever-present mosquitoes. Damn bugs never did seem to get enough of her blood. When she was a kid, her mom used to say the bugs loved her because she was so sweet. At that moment, she'd have given anything to be bitter. She slapped her bare thigh and scratched at a bite below the hem of her too short shorts, wondering where the hell Brian had gone to. He had been right behind her. "Brian," she called, the flashlight beam jittering nervously over gnarled trunks and branches like crooked, reaching fingers. "Brian, come on!" When rough hands gripped her from behind, her first instinct was to let her attack her habit with a swift elbow. Of course, she knew it had to be Brian, so she reminded herself of why she was here, and then let out a cute, girly shriek, dropping her flashlight to the ground. "Boo!" Brian said, chuckling and slipping a hand up under her tank top. "Loser!" Dinah cried, rolling her eyes and pushing him away. "Grow up!" She bent to retrieve her flashlight, making sure Brian got a nice eyeful of the firm cheeks of her ass beneath the low-slung shorts. He was the first guy she'd ever dated that she also worked with. While she had originally been somewhat unsure of the idea, he was awfully sexy, strong, well-trained body with wide shoulders, and a lean waist. Handsome but rugged face, not too pretty, dark eyes, and a goofy, self-deprecating sense of humor. She found herself wondering if tonight would be the night that she would finally give in and sleep with him. "What? Did you think I was Jason?" Brian smirked, smacking her affectionately on the derriere. "Back from the grave and looking for action." "You and that Jason Voorhees bullshit." Dinah rolled her eyes dramatically as she straightened back up. "You don't really believe those campfire fairy tales, do you?" "Sure I do," Brian replied. "See, way back in the 1957 era, this freaky, deformed kid drowned in Crystal Lake because his slutty counselors were too busy making the beast with two backs to keep an eye on him." Dinah rolled her eyes again and tried to pretend she wasn't really listening, but she couldn't help being morbidly fascinated by the grisly tale. "A year later," Brian continued with relish, "those same counselors got offed by some unknown assailant. It wasn't until 1979, when some optimistic dope tried to reopen Camp Crystal Lake, that they finally figured out what was really going on. Not until a whole new generation of sluts and their horny boyfriends got butchered, of course." "So you're saying it was the freaky kid, this Jason Voorhees, that killed them?" Dinah asked. "No," Brian replied, grinning smugly. "Not yet, anyway." Dinah raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "It was his psycho mom, Pamela, who wanted revenge for her son's untimely death," he explained. "She's the one who killed the first 2 rounds of unlucky teenagers. That was before a little hottie named Alice chopped off her head and Junior took up the family vendetta. How could he? Dinah said. I thought you said he drowned. Nope. Brian obviously loved this long-winded discourse on the Voorhees history. Somehow, against all odds, Jason survived and grew to maturity, skulking around the lake, feeding off whatever he could catch and kill, waiting for another gang of promiscuous teenagers to show up. Then it's all mayhem and mutilation until, after several near misses, our boy in the second-hand hockey mask finally gets his clock cleaned by, of all people, a 12-year-old boy. Great, Dinah smirked. If a 12-year-old could kill him, I guess we've got nothing to worry about. Yeah, well, that was before he came back from beyond the grave, reanimated by a bolt of lightning. Brian hooked spooky fingers up around his face, casting monster shadows in the flashlight's beam. Get real, Dinah said. What is he, Frankenstein? You've got to be fucking kidding. Oh, I swear it's true, Brian said, his eyes wide and earnest. I guess you can't keep a bad man down. And I'm supposed to believe that he keeps on coming back over and over. No one really knows what keeps him coming back, Brian said theatrically. Is it some kind of demonic energy? Hatred so powerful even death can't stop it. Is there anything left of the young, scared kid he once was inside that rotting, murderous Hulk? Or have all the years of madness and killing transformed him into some unstoppable force of evil, with the soul of a slimy slug? Dinah shook her head, smiling slightly. Unstoppable force of evil, eh? She said. Keep up that yakking, and I'll have to come up with something else for you to do with your mouth. Oh, you promise? Brian grinned, snaking an arm around her waist as they walked. Look, Dinah pointed through the trees. There it is. Crystal Lake, Brian said. The trees parted, revealing a shimmering black mirror of sleek moonlit water. It's beautiful, Dinah said softly, surprised at how the stunning view had managed to dig up under her cherished urban cynicism. You're beautiful, Brian replied, sliding his arms around her waist further. It's hard to believe in all these gorgeous stories, Dinah said. Slaughtered camp counselors, dismembered co-eds and all that. This place seems so, I don't know, peaceful. Now who needs something to do with their mouth? Dinah smiled. Kiss me. She didn't need to ask twice. In the heat of that embrace, with the feel of Brian's strong hand sliding up over her breasts, teasing her sensitive nipples gently, all those awful stories seemed to melt away. She knew it would be good with him. She could tell by the way his slow, confident fingers traveled across her hungry skin. He was an excellent kisser. She could feel herself giving in to the gravity of desire. But she knew there were other things that needed to be dealt with first. So she forced herself to pull back and away from Brian. Okay, Tiger, Dinah said. I think you need to cool off. She stepped away from him, backing down the dock. How about a nice cool dip? She asked, pulling her tank top over her head, exposing her lean, flat belly and braless breasts. Her pale nipples stood out stiff in the cool night air, and she flashed a challenging smile. If you're trying to cool me off, Brian said, you are failing miserably. Come on, she said, skinning her shorts down her strong thighs and kicking them away. What are you afraid of, Jason? A frown passed over Brian's face as she took a step closer to the edge of the dock. Come on, Dinah, he said, his voice very anxious. I don't know if that's such a good idea. Scaredy cat, she said, turning away from him and raising her hands above her head. She was aware of his eyes on her body as she stood, poised naked in the moonlight. She worked out daily and was proud of her well-toned curves. She loved to show off, loved feeling men's eyes on her. She was the only woman at her unfeminine job and had almost no female friends. Those were the kind of odds she preferred. Her exposed flesh shivered into goosebumps as she stretched up to her toes and dived into the calm, dark water. Swimming through the cool blackness of the lake was almost like floating weightless through space. Total sensory deprivation. On land, it had been easy to brush off Brian's bloody and preposterous stories. In the unbroken darkness of the surrounding water, Dinah found her mind elaborating on those stories, painting lurid pictures of the hockey mask-clad predator stirring in the inky silt, drawn like a shark toward her warm living scent. She broke the surface, shuddering. At first, she was turned around, facing away from the dock. All around the lake, nothing but silent brooding and unbroken woods, giving away nothing. She turned back to find the dock deserted. "Brian?" she called. Her voice echoed across the water and bounced back to mock the pinched squeak of anxiety in the second syllable. "Brian, quit screwing around!" She pushed wet blonde hair away from her face and dunked her head backward to slick it back. Lake water trickled into her mouth and she spat, imagining she could detect an unwholesome rotten flavor beneath the cool metallic taste. "This isn't funny." Nothing, just mocking silence. You think you're getting any now? You aren't..." Something touched her leg. Whatever she was going to say was swallowed in a high, breathless gasp. She spun her body away from the stealthy touch. Was it the cool, sleek body of a fish? A clump of aquatic weeds? Cold, dead fingers? She felt it again, this time distressingly high up on the inside of her naked thigh. She made no sound, bit her lip, and began swimming toward the shore, with strong, quick strokes. She was less than halfway back when whatever was beneath her had enough of teasing, clamping down like a metal shackle around her slender ankle. Dinah grunted with surprise and fear, kicking back with her free leg as hard as she could. She barely had time to suck in a desperate breath before she was yanked down roughly, water closing over her head. In the black airlessness beneath the surface of the lake, terror and panic short-circuited Dinah's thoughts completely. Acting out of pure instinct, she kicked out again and this time felt the heel of her foot connect with something hard and smooth. A jolt of pain shot up her leg, but the grip on her other ankle slackened and she wrenched free and shot to the surface, letting out a howl that was half terror and half fury. Muscles jacked on adrenaline moved her through the water like a torpedo, and in seconds she was pulling herself up onto the dock. Her clothes were gone. She wasted a few precious moments in a futile search, but it was clear that her clothing had been deliberately taken. She would have to run, naked and shoeless, or fall victim to... She heard a gentle splashing, fat droplets of water falling back into the lake. When she turned, what she saw rising from the dark water burned itself into her consciousness forever. All the details of Brian's story were there. The cracked and ancient hockey mask, slimed with dying algae. The ichors of decomposition, tattered and ill-fitting work shirt and pants stained black with dried blood, and the dull gleam of the pitted and battle-scarred machete. But nothing could have prepared her for the sheer bulk of the massive shoulders, enormous hands, and the misshapen head, like a rotten pumpkin left out on the porch long after Halloween, sitting atop his linebacker's physique. And the eye, the single visible eye, burning with such a cold fury that it took Dinah's breath away. She never considered herself to be a helpless girly girl. She had been in more than her share of violent, interpersonal encounters and was well trained in 100 ways to disarm an attacker of any size. But this was so utterly wrong, so beyond the realm of the possible that she stood there, mesmerized as he pulled himself up onto the dock. Jason, she thought. It really was Jason. She knew what she had to do, but her body seemed sluggish and unresponsive, reluctant to obey. He was less than 6 feet away when she was finally able to do the only thing she could do. She ran. Racing through the dark woods, her bare feet torn and her naked flesh whipped by clutching branches. Dinah hoped desperately that she was going the right way. She was pretty sure she recognized the tree on her left, split into two like thick upside-down legs. But she could hear Jason crashing through the woods behind her, like an enraged grizzly, closing the distance between them with the relentless inevitability of a nightmare. And it was easy to let panic win. She jammed her fear down inside herself as far as she could and forced her legs to double their speed. Almost there, she thought. Almost. Ahead of her were 2 huge, perfect oak trees, side by side like temple columns. She'd never been so happy to see anything in her life. She made for the trees like a football player going for the winning touchdown. teeth clenched and breath burning in her heavy chest. "Now!" she cried as she came barreling between the trees. Jason came through seconds later, and a weighted steel net dropped down over him. Arc lights flooded the scene as SWAT-armored men poured from the surrounding woods like angry ants, each drawing a bead on the dirty white hockey mask beneath the steel net. Jason flailed with soundless fury as a pair of finger-sized tranquilizer darts embedded themselves in the cold flesh of his neck. Dinah quickly found her stash of extra clothing and gear. She barely had time to fasten the Velcro on her Kevlar vest when she heard a high, womanish shriek, followed by a deafening burst of gunfire. She was still barefoot when she spun to see one of her team go down in a showy gush of arterial spray. Jason had torn through the steel mesh like it was lingerie, easily freeing his machete hand and slicing the man's throat to the bone. "Kenworth!" Dinah called to her team leader. "Foam!" Reed Kenworth was not a man who got flustered when the shit hit the fan. He nodded tersely and tossed Dinah a device that looked like a space-age backpack vacuum cleaner. Meanwhile, 2 other men were dragging their dying buddy out of the fray while Brian and several others emptied their clips into Jason's uncaring bulk. Jason shrugged off the bullets as if they were mosquitoes and easily pulled himself completely free of the netting, slashing the face of the man to his right, then sinking his machete deep into Brian's muscular thigh. Brian clutched at his bleeding leg and tumbled awkwardly backward, directly into his teammate's line of fire. Bullets flattened themselves against his Kevlar, and he grunted, collapsing semi-conscious to the ground. "Hold your fire!" Kenworth called. Panic reigned over the harshly lit, chaotic scene as Jason advanced on the terrified shooters, calm and undaunted. "I said hold your goddamn fire!" Kenworth shouted. "We don't want to damage the merchandise." "Get back!" Dinah hollered, gripping the nozzle that protruded from the backpack-like device. "Get the fuck back!" She stepped fearlessly into Jason's path and pulled the trigger on the heavy nozzle. Jason staggered back as he was blasted with thick, sticky gray foam. As the gunk enveloped him, his movement slowed, his massive body immobilized by the gluey strands until he fell forward like a chainsawed redwood. Dinah struggled to slow her breathing as they all watched silently, waiting to see what would happen next. Jason struggled against the hardening foam for another 30 seconds, and eventually went totally still. "Is he tranked?" Dinah asked. Kenworth stepped forward and towed the side of Jason's malformed head. No reaction. Kenworth nodded. "Okay," Kenworth said. "Sanders and Polk, get Thompson and Jackowitz stabilized into the medic ASAP. Beck, Levin, and DeVere, help me secure the target and get him ready to move." He paused and put a big hand on Dinah's trembling shoulder. "Good job, Ridgway." Dinah watched as Polk tore off a piece of his shirt and wrapped it around Brian's bleeding thigh. Brian's face was as white as cottage cheese and shined with sweat. His teeth were locked down tight against the unendurable agony. His eyes met Dinah's wide with pain and fear. Dinah looked away. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. Okay, this has been Chapter 1 and a great preview of what is to come with Friday the 13th, The Jason Strain. Sorry for the kind of short video today. There's an odd amount of chapters in this book, and I'm going to start doing 2 chapters a day after today, and it'll all even out in the end. I thought this was a great way to introduce this book to you guys, get you pumped for it. There is a lot of hate for this book and reviews and stuff, and I did read this one way back in late 05 or early 06, and I don't remember loving it, but I don't remember hating it either. And after reading Hell Lake, I believe this book is going to be satisfying. Alright guys, let me know what you think about the little preview of Friday the 13th, The Jason Strain. It felt a lot like Jason Goes to Hell there for a minute, with her, it was all a trap to catch Jason. Yeah, let me know what you think, guys. Be sure to subscribe, click that like button, join our Facebook group. There's a link in the description below. And I will see you guys tomorrow with 2 chapters of Friday the 13th, The Jason Strain. This has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying thanks for listening. And don't click that thumbs down button, because
it's got a death curse.